Hi, everyone. I'm Todd Keats, founder, CEO of My Care Friends.
And I'm Katie Seymour, VP of Programming and Community.
The series features individuals who began caregiving in childhood and continue supporting loved ones today. Their lived experience and honesty shape every conversation.
Millions of young people provide meaningful care for family members, yet many remain unseen and unsupported. Through compassion and connection, My Care Friends hopes to build understanding and help create a future where young carers are truly seen and valued.
Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and watch each episode on the My Care Friends Network on YouTube. And now, Jacqueline, Omar, and Aditya, over to you.
Thanks, Todd and Katie. We're excited to bring this very important and special My Care Friends educational program to viewers wherever you may be around the world. Caregiving is a responsibility that presents many challenges, and even more so for people who are or have been young carers, like us. We hope you'll join us for each episode, whether you are a young carer or someone who cares about a young carer. Today's episode is Childhood Interrupted. Now, as young carers and young adult carers, caregiving can have profound impacts on our childhoods, and as usual, I'm joined by my fellow carers and awesome people in general. We've got Omar and Jack. So, if you could all say hi. And yeah, it's great if you're coming back from episode 1 and 2 to join us back on this journey. And today I think we're going to be touching upon something pretty personal and something as well that has really impacted and shaped who we are today as carers. And I presume this lands with other caregivers in general. And it's about how our responsibilities have kind of reshaped what a childhood really looks like. Often we're told that childhood is about enjoying yourself, being carefree, having those memories, playing with friends, falling off the bike, which I've done many times. But oftentimes, for a lot of people, it's not as rosy as what it looks like or what it's meant to be. And we're going to be sharing our experiences and kind of understanding from a caregiver's perspective how looking after someone else and how growing up as a caregiver can sometimes make that rosy picture less rosy. I haven't phrased that greatly, but we'll get right into it. And I'm joined by Omar and Jack, and I'm Aditya. And you know what? Anyone want to share their story first? Let's kickstart this. Why not?
Yeah, I think my moment of realization for how being a young carer impacted me came in early primary school. I went to the same primary school as my twin brother for the first couple of years, and that's when I really noticed that my childhood was different to my peers. Because if my brother needed emotional support or support engaging in class, the teachers would come and get me from my class and take me to wherever my twin brother was in the school campus. And they sort of used me as his emotional regulation when they didn't know how to manage his challenging behaviors. And I think that really made it obvious to me how even the adults in my life that are meant to be the people that we trust and we rely on, they didn't feel that they had the skills or the capabilities to manage someone with a disability. So they were relying on me as his twin sister to use the skills that I had sort of naturally developed growing up as a young carer. And I think that was the first moment I realized that I had responsibilities that were different to my classmates.
I think just the idea of responsibility for me, so kind of just like with my story, I think the moment I realized that childhood wasn't going to be what was initially promised was sort of this idea of responsibility. You're always told that, this is a moment in time where you got to be carefree. You're the child, you're the one who messes the house and gets, and just causes a mess and just enjoys stuff. But for me, so I look after my younger brother, who has autism and ADHD. He's nonverbal, and he can't really, he hasn't got a sense of risk awareness. So I'm always looking out for him, making sure he's not up to anything, and he's always dependent on his family members to look after him. And I think for me, I kind of realized very early on that childhood was going to be a bit different when I realized that my position as a sibling slowly became kind of like a parent position. And I think maybe some of you might be able to relate to that. And so from going from a child straight to a parent at the age of 7 or 8 is a very interesting experience. But what about you, Omar? Let's uh, let's hear from you then.
Yes, I totally agree with what you said, especially I felt more as an adult than a child. For me, I didn't really like realize my childhood, was different at first. I really did think it was very normal, and it wasn't until I saw how other kids were living was in which I thought about, okay, this is not normal for me. I didn't get a chance to go to, after school parties. I didn't get a chance to, ride my bike outside or, go in my backyard and just jump on trampolines or do all these fun things, that other kids had the opportunities to do. But for me, I didn't really understand it at first, I guess, until I saw how other kids were being presented at school, the things that they were wearing that I didn't have, brand new Jordans, brand new these different clothes and stuff. And I just didn't have that. But for me, it really was seeing how other kids were living, how they was dressing, how they were hanging out with their other friends and how the teachers, really would comfort them different than me. But I definitely agree with what you said about, us as, youth caregivers, we are put in this position of, always having to be strong and always, having to just put up with things. But I really did feel like an adult.
And I think that's quite interesting what you touched upon, which is sort of looking at other kids, other children, how they live their childhood. I think to an extent, I think that comparison is what really brings a lot of insight because you don't really realize when you're a child what childhood is meant to be. There's no right or wrong. There's no set framework for what a childhood experience is meant to be. You only really realize that through social media and through talking to other people after a certain age. So I'm interested to kind of understand what you all felt was the difference between, did you ever feel a comparison or a difference between yourself and some of your friends at the time, some of your peers? And sort of, I'm afraid, I'm sorry if I sound like I'm interviewing all of you, but
Mm.
whether or not, at what point did we all realize that actually there is a big difference and something, this isn't actually the normal, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I think that's what people forget is that you don't know what's normal until you see how everyone else is experiencing life. And I think that's the same with just being a twin. When people find out I'm a twin, they're like, oh my gosh, what's it like being a twin? But it's like, I can't tell you what it's like being a twin because I don't know what it's like not being a twin. So I feel like it's a similar experience with being a young carer. Like, I can't tell you how it's really different because I don't know exactly how you grew up not as a young carer. So I think the way you framed it in terms of comparison is definitely true for me. Like it was only when I went to other people's houses and I saw that it was really easy for them to have friends over, or they could just have a sleepover. All they had to do was ask their parents for permission. But at my house, it was a lot more complicated and a lot more went into it. And because my brothers had such high sort of support needs and routine was really important to make sure that they felt calm and had a solid structure, something like spontaneous social plans or sleepovers wasn't so easy to just arrange. So I definitely think it was when I was going to other people's houses and experiencing their lives outside of school hours that I really noticed the difference.
For me, actually, I think, and whatever you said is absolutely correct. And I can relate to everything, including the sleepovers as well. It's not as spontaneous. But for me, I think the moment where I realized that, something's a little bit different here was when I saw other people my age and their siblings. So obviously, I've got the sibling relationship, and I'm sure, Jack, you can relate to this. But once you understand that brotherhood or the siblinghood is different, and you get to see how other people your age are interacting with their brothers or sisters. It's sometimes, so for me, it was really insightful because I started to see, well, this is what you see two children sort of playing around, beating each other up, and having a regular sort of they're talking to each other, they're arguing back and forth. And you see, maybe that's how, siblings and childhood siblings are meant to interact. And
Mm.
so I think from that's where I personally started to see a bit of difference, and I started thinking, hang on, actually, my role seems to be a little bit more like a parent role, like a carer role. And yeah, I think that this is all really interesting, sort of just seeing there are because when you're a child, you pick up on slight nuances, right? I mean, things like the sleepover, these are we would often take it for granted now that we're slightly older. But I think it's the slight nuances that you really pick up on, and over time that really shapes your viewpoint. But I want to move on to something quite similar, which is this idea of growing up too soon. And one thing that I think we can all relate to is this idea of becoming too mature, like becoming mature too early, kind of growing up, becoming an adult before you're an adult. So, I'm interested to hear how we all experienced that. What do we all think about that?
I would say for me, especially having to take care of my nana and my uncle at age of 10, I would say it was the moment I realized that my mom taught me how to inject insulin into his arm with needles. I was like, I don't think kids are supposed to be, doing this. That was a moment that really struck my mind. I was like, okay, I'm really doing this as a 10-year-old. I'm putting on gloves. I'm, you know, putting a wristband around his arm to inject, just something insulin into him. But that moment made me realize that, okay, I'm really grown up fast. I really don't have the opportunity to just feel the world around me, I would say. I don't have the opportunity to, just have fun or just be in my own world. It was just, quick after quick after quick. It was just these little moments, these little things. I remember I had to learn his medical history, all the things that he had, such as diabetes, heart failure, and just all these different things. And also, knowing the procedure to, when he had a seizure, lifting him out the bed and putting him on the floor. There's so much you can do with your small hands, and especially as a child, you really shouldn't be doing that. But when you love someone so much, and when you've been caring for someone for so long, and that's really your loved ones, you really have no choice, but to do it. You're really placed onto that role, I guess. But for me, it was really the moment where I had to inject insulin and into my uncle's arm. But what about you, Jacqueline?
Yeah, what you said about your small hands really stuck with me. I know you've mentioned that in previous episodes, and I think it just really shows how like jarring it is the juxtaposition between being young and having such a big responsibility. And I think for me, being called mature, it was always like a compliment. Like adults in my life, family, friends, friends of my mum would say, "You're so mature, you're such a big help to your mum, you're so strong." And I think we need to sort of consider whether it's a good thing to be that strong or that mature at a young age. So I think when Omar talks about doing so much and helping so much when you're like a physically small child, you also have to think about, do you need children to be that strong, or that mature? And I think it's really something that we all developed out of necessity. And I think the maturity definitely has helped me in my life, means that I've been able to enter into an advocacy space and helped me in my career aspirations and things like that. But I think it's important to consider that maturity isn't necessarily a positive attribute because it's sort of gained through those challenging experiences. And sometimes as a child, you just want to have fun. You want to be silly. You kind of want to make dumb decisions. And being told that you're mature means you, or at least I felt like I had to live up to that expectation. Like because people knew I could be mature and they knew I could be strong, I felt like I always had to be. But sometimes you don't want to have to be so resilient.
Yeah, and I'm kind of put to shame right now because I still do have very small hands. But if we're looking at, I think this idea of maturity is also a compliment that I got, which is one of the many compliments that I get. Um, but oftentimes I think it's really interesting because maturity, when you're talking about a child, you think, oh, I'm growing up. People think I'm grown up. People think I'm smart and intelligent. But I'm quite interested in this idea. Perhaps it is just a form of adaptation almost to kind of the challenges that caregivers have had growing up that they're kind of so accustomed to. So I know in my situation, I became so accustomed to the regular activities of just looking after my brother, treating him with the hygiene and getting him dressed in the morning and feeding him and making sure he's safe and just those activities, it accelerated my maturity, but it kept exposing me because it kept exposing me to all of these kind of grown-up activities. And like you said, I want to do dumb things. I wanted to be a child, but instead I became sort of like a parent. And I think it's not even just about maturity in that moment, it's also about the anxieties and the thoughts you have in the future long term. So for me, a lot of it is thinking, how do I look after my brother in the future? How do I support him? What systems do I need in place? What are some of the dangers in the long run? What happens when sort of my parents aren't strong enough to help me around? So I think that thinking, that mindset as well, also kind of brings a lot of maturity. It's not just the tasks you do physically, it's sometimes the thoughts you have in your mind. And kind of just leading on to the last bit in the small segment, which is our emotional needs, kind of growing up too soon. When you mature, children are naturally emotional. They have a lot of emotional outbursts, but sometimes when you mature a lot and you mature quite quickly, how's that affected your emotional needs, kind of your mental well-being and just your overall mental state?
I think as a child, I was definitely really anxious. Like, I don't know, my mum always described me as an anxious child, and I was. And that was definitely like as a result of my environment. And I think when you are expected to be so mature, anxiety and maturity don't really go together. So it's hard to like live up to those expectations and sort of validate your own emotions of anxiety when you're worried about that.
Yeah. What about you, Emma?
I would say for me, I really did struggle mentally, and especially with anxiety as well. I just remember thinking, especially I was too afraid to tell my mom because I kind of felt guilty for feeling that way, and I didn't want to, just let her down because she's already been through, too much as well. She was working two jobs just to, put food on the table to just keep the lights on. So for me, it really also sent her struggle also made my mental health, I say, get worse because her struggling and then seeing my loved ones struggling as well, it was like a combined struggle for me, which really affected my mental health. Um, because I really didn't get a chance, just to feel anything around me. I really was put in this predicament, especially at a young age, to be placed upon mental health issues early. I would say it's like I really grew into mental health issues without my approval, I would say. But it really did affect me mentally. At times I really did struggle to eat. I really did struggle to, just even talk to people for a while. Um, but for me, I would say, yeah, caregiving did take an effect onto my mental health. And it wasn't until college until I finally realized to get out of that funk and out of that that bubble. But growing up, it really did make me think about how kids should never have to feel this way. Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, so I think that's very interesting. And one thing, sort of moving on, is we tend to talk a lot about ourselves as caregivers. Obviously, this entire podcast is about caregiving, if I've read the contract right. And I think sometimes it's kind of interesting to look at who we actually are outside of being caregivers, because obviously it's a really big part of our lives, but at the end of the day, we are all very interesting and beautiful human creatures. So I'm interested to sort of hear, who were you outside caregiving, especially during your childhood? Who are you now? Um, and to what extent do you think that your caregiving responsibilities crafted that other side of you outside caregiving? Like for me, I think that caregiving really helped because I did a lot of public speaking and a lot of opportunities to advocate and really push forward the message within the UK about youth caregivers and young carers and the support we need and raising awareness for disabled. And that really crafted an interest in things like speaking, advocacy, and journalism and writing. And sort of that became who I was for a very long time. outside my caregiving responsibilities and and then I started venturing into different fields and topics. But what about you? Like, what did you experience? Who were you outside of your caregiving responsibilities?
I think I definitely have lots of interests that aren't related to my role growing up as a young carer. Like I played the saxophone, I'm in a jazz band, I'm really passionate about that. I played lots of netball growing up, which I hear isn't really a sport that's played in the US, but it's like basketball without a backboard and you can't run with the ball. Um, and I think it also sort of shaped my studies in a way that I knew that because I'd grown up as a young carer, I wanted to have a career that wasn't necessarily in the care space because I feel like that was my predominant life growing up. And then I knew that I wanted a career that was a bit separate to that so that I could, yeah, sort of have a life outside of it.
I would say as for me, at a very young age, I always took took a loving to writing. Even though I was very shy as a kid, writing was one thing that really was my comfort zone for me. So growing up and going to college and studying film and television, I would say filming saved me. Also, outside of that space, I also learned how to, speak up and advocate for, other youth caregivers. And I found a passion for that because I just want to be a voice for them that I wish I had growing up. But while also doing that, I learned to, get out of my shyness and, really just put my passion forth to, just speaking up for others.
Yeah. And I think I like this idea of kind of using these other things almost as an outlet. Like for me, I play the piano. I've done quite a lot of sports. Um, and I do like building things. I like, Lego and also just sort of the creative things such as journalism, writing as well. And for me, what I've noticed that over time, that's been almost like an outlet for my mind and soul and body, whatever you want to say. But I think it's always, yeah, it's been kind of interesting, and especially with my interest in public speaking and advocacy, how that kind of started off from my caregiving responsibilities and grew into something else. And I think it's interesting to see that we speak a lot about caregiving, but actually, just like a lot of other people, maybe we are a lot more than just caregivers. We have our own set of interests, related or unrelated. I think that is sometimes a bit of a misconception that people tend to have when people speak about caregiving. For a lot of people, the impression is that, they're caregivers and that's all it is about them. It's only caregiving. And so going into kind of what we wish people really understood, just some short reflections maybe about what you think, what you really wished adults and people who might be listening to this, or just people in general, knew better about sort of caregiving and sort of what we've spoken about today with regards to an interrupted childhood.
Yeah, I would say it's important that adults know not to define you by your caring role. But I think in order to not be defined by it, you sort of have to start with recognizing the caring role and having that language. But I think that's really difficult with the lack of awareness about what a young carer is. It's hard to have that validation. But that's really the starting point to recognize that you do have a young caring role, but that's not your whole identity. And then adults can support you with your hobbies outside of that and the things in your identity that aren't related to being a young carer.
Yes, for me, I would say I wish adults would understand that, just because I handled things, well, doesn't mean it wasn't hard, You don't have to, always call me, oh, sweetheart, you're so strong for doing this. Oh, honey, you got it. Keep going, I just feel like helping them understand that will go a long way as well because this is an issue that is very important and this is a topic that needs to be talked about more because especially as youth caregivers, these are things that we really should not be doing because we are kids as well, but for our family and the sake of our loved ones, it is our responsibility to do that because who's going to look after them when they only have you?
Yeah, so very powerful reflections. And if I want to add a bit of wisdom myself, I think sometimes sympathy, the sympathy that you get from a lot of people who hear about your experiences, sometimes it ends up only being sympathy and it ends up being this sort of, like you said, oh, you're so strong, I feel so bad for you. You're going through a lot. And I think that often comes from this idea that, people sometimes forget we're not just caregivers. We have other things, but this is just, it's a major part of our lives. It is perhaps the main part of our lives. But to go through that, come out the other end, and still try your best to do other things to have outlets, I think that's the real strength. It's
Mm.
not even just about getting through it, it's also going through the other side and just trying your best to have those outlets to not let it consume you entirely. And I really wish that instead of being sort of showered in sympathy and kind of this almost patronizing, I feel so bad for you, you're so strong. Perhaps just sometimes just getting help or, having someone to just talk to, or having someone to who can actually help you with tangible things instead of just kind of superficial comments. So, helping
Absolutely.
someone at school, helping someone with, managing their sort of logistics with their life, their daily life. Um, so yeah, I think that that's the sort of main thing that I wish uh, people knew.
I think that
And
sort of links into,
yeah,
sorry to jump in, but like the difference between sympathy and empathy. Like as a child, you don't want too much sympathy because it does make you feel like you're so different. Like if you feel bad for me, then my situation must be bad. Excuse me. But I think it's important to have empathy as someone who has a young carer in your life, to put yourself in their shoes and to think, if I were that young person managing those responsibilities, what support would I want? And I think that links to the practical support you were talking about, Aditya, where you don't just want people to feel sorry for you, you want some support and you want some respite from your caring role.
yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes having too much of that sympathy can kind of reinforce this negative cycle. You hear that this is a really bad thing and this is completely consuming your life. You think that, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. And you let that consume you, and it just feeds back into this negativity cycle, this negativity loop almost. And it's really difficult to get out of that. Um, but just some closing reflections. I think this has been really insightful to understand that how childhoods have been affected despite the differences within our caring responsibilities. And in a way, when we just talk about what we are outside caregivers, sometimes it's important to remember it's not gone. Childhood hasn't just eroded, but it's just different. It's just nuanced, right? And I think that's perhaps one of the best ways to reframe it is that it's no longer just a thing of, we lost a childhood, we lost everything, it was all woe, but it's we had these troubles, we had these tribulations a lot earlier than most people, but we've got through it, and we're also trying our best to be ourselves, our genuine, honest selves. And coming back to, you know, what I was saying about needing tangible help and everything, next episode we are going to be talking about, school versus care, sort of how, school and how it is quite difficult to balance school and care. But just a final word from me: caregiving doesn't really just stay at home. It does follow you everywhere. And like I said, next episode we're going to be talking about what happens when that reality of caregiving shows up at school. So, any last words from anyone before we close off?
I guess I would like to say, just because, adults tell you that, you are strong, you are strong, but don't let that get to you as, brushing off as sympathy or something like that. Just know you do have feelings and you are somebody, and there are other youth caregivers out there going through the same thing as you. Just know you are loved and we are here for you to, support you. And I'm grateful that we are here in this space to give you this platform to let you know that, you are not alone.
Absolutely. And I think that really links to the theme of this episode, Childhood Interrupted. I mean, we definitely had different childhoods to those around us, but it was just interrupted. Like, I don't think I could say that I lost my whole childhood. I had lots of fun times with my siblings and, yeah, lots of fun, innocent times that weren't always doom and gloom and caring responsibilities. But I think it just looked different for us, It was fun
Yeah.
childhood times with one of my brother's support workers or with a carer, or when a family member was at respite and I got to have one-on-one time with my mum. I called that girly time. Like mum and I would do like a girly activity together. Like I'd go and get a baby chino and she'd get a coffee and like that important connection. So it is just interruptions, but just because our childhood looked different to everyone else's doesn't mean it wasn't valuable to us.
Yeah, and I mean, my brother and I still argue over food, and we sometimes get into rough housing as well. Um, but yeah, like you said really beautifully, it's just interrupted. It's not gone. It's interrupted, and there's a lot of memories that have been made through these experiences. But thank you very much for all of your insights today. It's been a really wonderful space to share our experiences, and I hope for those of you listening, you can maybe relate to some of this, or maybe you just enjoyed our experiences and what we had to say. Thank you very much.